Hi, this is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast, where we like to talk about all things about being a global citizen. As many of you may know, I live and work in Hanoi, Vietnam. I have spent most of my life living and working in Asia. Actually, I recently put down many of my thoughts in a book called A Bus on the Dusty Road. And the Dusty Road podcast is part of A Bus on a Dusty Road, except in my book on A Bus on a Dusty Road, I go back through many stories I've learned, people I've met throughout my journey of being here in Asia, and then I've included with it some important life lessons of things that we can learn from these stories. There's many great people out there in the world. Many of them don't have money. Many of them are poor. Many of them whose names I've forgotten, but yet they've taught me some valuable life lessons. And that's kind of the essence of the book, A Bus on a Dusty Road. You can actually find a copy of the book on Amazon. It's in the ebook format, and it's also in a paperback format. One of the countries which I write about quite a bit in my book, of course, is Vietnam, because I have spent a lot of time in Vietnam. And so one of the questions I want to answer in a blog that I've written recently is, how strong are Confucian values in Vietnam? It's really hard to talk about Asia without talking about Confucian values. This is because it's very much a part of the culture. And here are some reasons why Confucian values are still part of the Vietnamese culture. One is that Vietnamese, they believe in showing respect to the elders, to their parents. You will even hear today in Vietnam in many places where children will go into accounting or they will become a doctor, not because they want to, but because their parents tell them to. They will have that kind of respect even today to their parents. They may marry somebody because their parents tell them to get married to that person. It's changing, of course, as the younger generation comes up, but it's still very, very strong values that are ingrained in the Vietnamese culture and society. Respect for the elders, even within their own language. They have different titles and different ways they call people according to their age. That's why Vietnamese will many times ask you, how old are you? Because they want to know whether they should call you a chi or they should call you em, which means that you're younger than them, or chi for a woman means that you're older. So they want to really understand your age so they know what type of respect needs to be shown. Vietnam is also a patriarchal society, and this is one of the Confucian values also. It is a very strong patriarchal society. They may not always educate the girls. They may educate the boys first, especially if a family's poor. And you might see this out in the villages. And I talk about this a bit in my book on A Bus on a Dusty Road, about many of these young girls that I met out there in the villages that are having to take care of their younger brothers. And they may have an older brother. They might have a brother who's even younger than them, who is still allowed to be in school, where they themselves are not in school because of the sense that they are a girl. I talk in my book about one young girl that I met like this who came to get a blanket from us. She walked 25 kilometers through the mountains with a younger brother on her back and her older brother in front of her in essentially flip-flops in pretty cold weather so that she could try to get a blanket. But she was not able to go to school. She was 11 years old. And she talked about how every day she dreamed of going to school, but was not able to go because of her family situation. Now, this is not common, of course, in the cities. This is not common in other places. But, in some of the, of course, villages, this could be more common. But if a family has a choice many times between sending a son to college or a daughter to college, they will probably send the son to college and not the daughter, even though this is changing now throughout Vietnam and in Asia. Vietnamese believe in ancestor worship. Almost every single Vietnamese home you go into, you will find some type of altar. And on the altar, you'll find some pictures of their ancestors who have passed away. And you will find that most Vietnamese will know about their ancestors. In fact, many Vietnamese families still have these family books where the books will go back for generations to generations. In fact, some of them may go back 22 generations. But even to drive home the point again about how much more men are seen than women, in some of these family books, they may only write down the name of the male relatives and not any of the female relatives. So even though the books go back very far, there may be no recorded names of any of the female relatives because they considered the male relatives to be the most important part for the family line. So, that is why you will find in Vietnam, there's a huge respect for their ancestors. Most Vietnamese know which village they come from. They know and understand about their ancestors. And this is very much a Confucian value. They have respect for the elders. I mentioned this before, that you call people by different names, by different titles according to their age. This is very different than China or some other parts of Asia. This is very much ingrained into the Vietnamese society. This whole entire respect for the elders. The next thing, which is you will find very much in Vietnam, is education and Confucianism. Even though I've seen girls in the villages that have not been able to go to school, Vietnam still has a much higher literacy rate than even the United States. Literacy is very high in Vietnam. It is over 90% or higher. This is because education and getting some education is considered to be paramount in the Vietnamese society. So most Vietnamese you will find will, get education. They'll consider their children's education extremely important, especially in the larger cities. People will go to colleges. They consider getting an education as extremely important part of life. So while living in Vietnam, I've seen some shifts in the traditional Confucian values. It's been influenced by the Western culture, but this change is still particularly, it might be evident in the younger generation, but in the older generation, they still have many and hold dear to many of these same values of the Vietnamese society. The westernization has softened, I guess you could say, softened these values a bit, but at the same time, they're still there and they're ingrained as part of the Vietnamese culture. So if you're traveling to Vietnam, it's important that you sort of understand this because it'll help you to understand life in the society. And if you are traveling to Vietnam, I do recommend that you check out the book, A Bus on a Dusty Road, which is on Amazon. It will help you to be able to see a lot about Vietnam and other parts of Asia and to understand some of the culture that maybe you would not normally understand. This is Anita from Dusty Roads Podcast, which is part of our blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road. We've written on this as How Strong Are Confucian Values in Vietnam. We'll give you a link below in our description. We'll also put a link below in the book in case you are interested in checking that book out. We'd like to thank you for being part of our community. We truly do appreciate you.